our second panel. I'm going to take a little bit more of a back seat here to our experts. So we are going to start off with a presentation from Jonathan Ells from ERG, who's been partnering with NYSERDA and OGS on a clean fleet plan, really outlining the best practices and ways that fleet teams can think about their vehicles, but also their systems, which is going to be very important for making sure, again, that they're making the right kind of matches for those vehicles. To that second point, we're going to move then to Laura Caola from Samsara, who's going to do a demo of their telematics system and how it can be used for both EV planning, but also facility planning and thinking through your build-outs based off of your dwell times. And finally, we'll land with Keith Kerman from NYC DCAS, who will tell us all about all of the great things that have been happening down in New York City and the great kind of progress they've made really being a leader in fleet conversion. So I will start with you, Jonathan, and get your presentation up. All right, it's all yours.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Bill, for all the work over the past year. Thanks, Emily, to your team. Bill said I was an expert, so I want to, speak a little extemporaneously. I've got probably 20 years doing this, at least definitely more experience than anyone else up here on this panel, I would say. But there are two things I wanted to mention just off the top. Firstly, we talked about some of the greater geographies in New York State and the 62 counties in New York State. I came up here from Pleasantville in Westchester County this morning in my little Prius Prime. I've had the vehicle for not quite 9 months. I've probably fueled it 4 times. And this could be an ad line for Toyota, but literally one of the times I went to refuel it, I couldn't remember how to open the fuel filler door because I hadn't used it in 6 months. So I've probably spent maybe $100 to go 4,000 miles, and it's been great. Albany, Boston, wherever you need to go. So I think the state's going to see a lot of benefits from the electrification push and reliability and getting around the state. The second thing, I just want to set the stage here. We're talking about fleet electrification, zero emission vehicles, 2035 goals. There's a newspaper called the New York Times that some of you may have heard of that thinks fairly highly of itself. And they did an article sort of poo-pooing the EV push and talking about how we're nowhere near these 50% targets and EV sales are slowing down. And the number that they cited to make their case was that only 7% of the market in the previous calendar year was electric vehicles. To any of those of us like Keith and I who've been doing this for 15, 20 years, I mean, I literally laughed out loud. It's at 7%. I think the year before that, John Markowitz might know, it was like, what, 1%, 0.8%? I mean, it was absolutely nothing, infinitesimal. So if we're in a place where folks are saying, look, it's only 7%, this is horrible, I think we're going to be okay. So with that, I'm going to get into the slide deck. As many of you know, we've talked about the New York State Clean Fleet Plan. ERG was engaged along with our sub-vendor Energetics through a NYSERDA contract vehicle to support New York State OGS transitioning all of the light-duty fleet to zero emissions vehicles by 2035, which is based on the Executive Order 22 mandate issued in 2022. To set the stage, we're talking about somewhere around 17,000 light-duty vehicles, which is defined as 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating or less. There are some exemptions to that. There's a State Police, you're okay. Don't worry about it. Keep driving the Dodge Charger. And there are also some emergency exemptions, which I think were about what, Bill, 21%? That was an exemption there, which is all, you know, fairly consistent with what we've seen in other municipalities, such as New York City, with exemptions there. And the scope of the engagement: analyze the existing data sources, engage in agency interviews to understand best practices, understand the landscape as it exists now, review and analyze some of the existing EVSE in place and the current contracts, and make some recommendations on a path forward, including potentially telematics. Getting into some of the best practices around EVSE, one of the biggest questions I think that Deputy Commissioner Rubenstein had for us at the beginning of the engagement was, you know, what's a reasonable level of charging for this magnitude of rollout? What's the ratio? Where are we going to be if an agency is saying we need 1-to-1, every EV has to have a port to plug into at night, otherwise this is not going to be successful? Is that reasonable? You know, the headline finding is, at a reasonably large site, there's my caveat, you would be successful with at least 1.5 EVs for every one EVSE port, and you can definitely get that up to 2, which is going to help with your installation cost, help reduce your maintenance needs. You can see here in this photo that these dispensers are positioned such that multiple vehicles are accessible. You can charge from either side of the aisle, and there are some managed charging software solutions that can help you either sequentially or on a rotating round-robin basis charge, you know, multiple vehicles that are plugged in without needing to manually plug in or plug out the vehicles. So some labor savings there, even though we don't have the fancy pantographs. Also, again, none of this is genius level insight here. This is, you know, level 2 should be your most commonly deployed EVSE. It's going to be successful for the vast majority of cases, even with a battery electric vehicle, not just a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. The battery electric vehicles have a larger battery, but if you're sitting there from you know, Keith, what we used to talk about, the OMP inspectors, they would go inspect the parks, and then they'd come back, park the vehicle. It would sit there all night till 9:30 the next morning. Even on a level 2, a 7.2 kW, you're going to have plenty of time to get there. If you have a faster need, you could do a 19.2 kW level 2. But really, you want to do level 2 as the most common, and you don't want to get into DC fast charging unless there's a defined need. You have a vehicle that is a multi-shift vehicle. As you maybe get into some of those emergency applications, that's a potential use case. Or you know from the data, potentially from telematics, that the vehicle just does not have the dwell time to support that 8-hour charge and get a full charge, or at least an 80% charge, and go about its day. So, and then one of the other parts of the scope here was using the fleet data that exists to do a saturation analysis and understand, based on the domicile parking locations for the New York State fleet, where we should put the charging in, where the state should put the charging in to support that, how many are necessary, understanding the dwell time, and we had some data challenges really getting into that task. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Here is one of the model site layouts that we did. This is, I think this is semi-rural. I'm not 100% sure. Bill can correct me. But you can see a couple different options here for 2 ports in option A, and then there are 14 ports in option B. And you know, one of the interesting things here that you're looking at is, and we use the New York State contracting cost to actually develop a cost estimate for this site. Obviously, option B is much more expensive to do the 14 ports, but what's interesting is the per port cost drops massively compared to doing the option A with just 2 and doing all the trenching just for that. So you get into a situation where by doing a larger installation, sort of what John talked about with the future proofing, you're reducing your cost, and basically you're running, transformers, step up transformers, step down transformers, conduits, doing the trenching once and having this plug ready, having everything ready. You don't have to put in the actual EVSE at this time, but as you roll out the fleet, just have them ready so you can go put them in, plug and play, so to speak. Another best practice, the cheapest way to charge your vehicle is to get someone else to pay to put the charging in, whether it's Evolve New York, another provider, maybe Tesla, other OEMs, Electrify America, the NEVI funding, anything that's out there that someone else put in. And I agree with what the other panelists said. You really do need to see this charging in the wild to bring about that comfort level and that confidence in the trip and some of the larger distances involved in New York State. But I think we're going to get there, and we've heard a lot about the plans to get there. One of the other interesting things we looked at is we did a break-even analysis based on our total cost of ownership tool, using some of the data from the fleet, and for battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles on a basic, typical state use case, you're going to see that financially pays off in 4 to 6 years. Why do I say financially? That's not taking into account the value of the health benefits for the community and the other pollution reduction. If you just look on money savings, you're going to see a benefit there on that time frame. Obviously, as your mileage goes up, things only get better. Agency interviews, we talked to 6 agencies as part of this: Ag and Markets, DEC, State Parks, DOT, OGS, and the Office of Mental Health. No offense to anyone else, but Ag and Markets was by far the star of the show. I grabbed this picture from their website, and it really talks about the challenges they have. 60% of their drivers are operating from a non-fixed site. They're going from a home location or something. This is weights and measures. If you stop at a liquid fueling station, you'll see that little sticker that says certified by Division of Weights and Measures. These are the things. They're out there. They're doing dairy sampling, which is what we're looking at. Rural sites, farms, dirt roads, the fairgrounds, a lot of places where you just don't have a lot of infrastructure. You have long driving distances, very low population density in these areas. There's not going to be a lot of opportunity charging. So after I had this conversation, I said, that was fascinating. Now I understand why Bill wanted me to talk to those folks. And they're going to want me to write up a nice report about how they should be last. Some of the takeaways and common themes from across the agencies were limited funding for vehicle replacement. And part of this issue is as the MSRP of the average vehicle grows. I think in private sector transactions, it's north of $40,000 in the market today. So as you get into more expensive vehicles, the existing funds have not been indexed to meet that growth, and some of the additional technologies that are involved in the vehicles, some of the driver safety systems, et cetera. Lack of existing EVSE and infrastructure, we've talked about that. The next one is kind of interesting. Limited experience to date with zero-emission vehicles. Most people have not personally driven one. Most people do not have any experience with them at these agencies. The upside of that is they have not had any negative experiences. And that, I say that not to be facetious, but there is an opportunity to shape these experiences. I think one of the panelists said it before, this has to work. This kind of has to be successful. You will not get a second crack at the apple. If you don't believe me, Google electric school buses in the state of Maine and see how excited they are about that opportunity after they've had some bad experiences. They're pretty down on that. And then also just the lack of mission-specific vehicles, affordable light-duty pickups. Again, the Ford Lightning is out there, but it's not the cheapest vehicle to acquire. Coming back as I wind down my presentation, I mentioned some of the data gaps we had, and a lot of the analysis we were looking to do was around specific use cases, annual mileage, vehicle miles traveled. We need to know the parking locations. Those two factors, understanding the daily mileage and the parking location, are what you need to solve for how many chargers you need and where you need them. That was somewhat of a challenge for us across some of the multiple databases, the maintenance database, WEX fueling, in-house fueling, existing telematics. We weren't quite able to put our finger on that with a level of confidence. And this chart, and this very dry chart, really just shows some of the different data sources we used and the needs that we had and where this was useful for the total cost of ownership analysis, statewide cost. The bottom line is that there were a number of cases where we either did not have the data or did not have confidence in the data. It might have been manually entered at a WEX fueling site. Someone's putting in their fat finger data. We've all been there and typed in 99999 so we can go about our day. And I'm going to segue here into telematics. This is a screenshot from Samsara, who is the provider that the state's going to be working with. I also, as I'm editorializing up here, I do want to say, the first time I met with Samsara, and I've told this to Laura, they gave me the same spiel I've heard from many vendors, which is, we're really a software company. Telematics is not our thing. And I've heard this line so many times that I don't believe it anymore because I've been lied to. But we were meeting with them and we said, it'd be very interesting if you could track PTO engagement on some of our vehicles. And we could see, salt spreaders or dump trucks, whatever. Is this stuff actually getting used? And we met with them 2 weeks later and they showed us the feature. And they said, you guys mentioned this. Here's the feature. We coded this while we were gone. So I'm very excited. I was very pleased to hear that the state has selected them as a vendor. And some of the benefits of expanding these fleet data points, better understanding the actual use cases, understanding exactly where the vehicles go, utilization, potential underutilization, more accurate costing, the ability to do the saturation analysis that we were tasked with, and really understanding when people say they have a mission requirement, how accurate that is, how realistic that is, and what the market provides. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Thanks so much, John. So yeah, to that point of how we're creating good experiences for our drivers, and that really positive feedback loops exist on both ends of the spectrum. Bad experiences magnify and are replicated, and people share that with their fellow coworkers, but good experiences also magnify, and they tell their coworkers about the benefits and how much it has worked for them, which is what makes ensuring that we're finding the right kind of vehicles to electrify first important, and that we are getting those systems in place before we put those drivers on the road. So turning over to Laura from Samsara to talk through their tool.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you, Jonathan, for that plug. I owe you a beverage later. So I'm going to be talking about some of the tools kind of starting from ground zero that can be used to not just track and report on electric vehicles, but how do you even begin? So I will attempt to get out of the PowerPoint as quick as possible and get into some of those tools in a live dashboard demo. But just to give some background on who Samsara is, and not to kind of go along with the theme of we're not just a telematics company, but we really truly aren't. So we've coined this term called the Connected Operations Cloud. Essentially what that means is kind of connecting everything within an operation to the cloud. So at a baseline, we're an IoT company. Our goal is to improve the safety, efficiency, and sustainability of the operations that power our economy. So what does that mean kind of in layman's terms, and so you can see it visually? There's more to an operation than just a traditional vehicle, on-the-road vehicle. There are assets that help power our operations. There are physical sites and facilities that are a big part of that. There's the people that work and power the operation, and then there's all the apps and workflows and different things. So how do we connect all of those things to kind of one platform? And that's what Samsara does. We like to be kind of that single source of information across an entire operation. So you'll see here kind of some of the pieces and components, but at the end of the day, we're attempting to just connect anything we can to the cloud and be able to report back on that information. So from an electrification standpoint, I mean, it starts with reporting on your current assets. We're not 100% electrified yet, so how do we make the decision and determine how to move forward? So this is kind of what we see our three-stage approach being. So the first is planning. Setting targets, which a lot of times are kind of from the top down, right? A certain percentage of vehicles have to be electrified by a certain time, so that's where you begin your planning stages. And then what you want to do is identify, where do we begin? If we're going to start with our first 5-10%, how do we make that decision? And I'll show you some of the tools that we have to kind of help aid in that decision and make it a very factual journey. The second is transition, and a big part of transition is actually getting the buy-in. So when you start to introduce a different way of life, how do you get drivers, operators, employees, things like that to buy in and be able to use the tools appropriately to make sure that it's a successful transition, because we all know that there's a lot of money that goes into it as well. And the last thing is being able to scale it. And the way to scale it is to be able to report on the performance, see and understand a return on investment, and be able to use the tools appropriately to continue the journey all the way up to those sustainability targets that we talked about at first. So I'm going to exit that, and I'll go into some of our tools to get there. Okay. Where's my tabs went? All right. So the first one is our suitability report. So essentially what this does is, from a telematics perspective, obviously a lot of vehicles that we are tracking today and reporting on are still traditional fuel vehicles. So we have this suitability report, which essentially uses these 6 criteria. I don't know how small it is for you all out there, but I can kind of call it out a little bit. But using these pieces of criteria to determine a suitability stamp. So we go all the way from poor up to, I think it's perfect. I'm not sure if I've ever seen that. But essentially understanding things like, what's the daily usage and the daily range of a particular vehicle? What's the fuel efficiency? What are the emissions associated with that type of vehicle? And using those pieces of prescriptive data, we're able to stamp certain vehicles with its suitability for return on investment, potential extreme reduction in emissions, things that we'd look for in order to kind of make that decision. And essentially, once you look over your entire fleet, maybe you can choose the top 10% that have that excellent score and understand that very quickly you'd be able to see either a return on your investment from a fuel perspective, or of course, from a sustainability perspective, how can we quickly reduce emissions and report on that. So that's kind of stage one, where do we begin? We have something called the Fuel and Energy Hub, which reports on sustainability, usage, things like idling, right? That's going to be a big piece of how to reduce emissions and things like that. But we're also looking at how vehicles are being used. So driver efficiency speaks more to how the vehicle is being operated. So do we have high torquing, a lot of acceleration, a lot of braking, things that can kind of contribute to excess fuel waste and wear and tear on a vehicle. So just kind of another data point that we look at to see how suitable a vehicle is for transitioning over, and then of course being able to report on it. Efficiency is going to be a lot around your miles per gallon, sustainability, things like that. Then we get into the point of actually tracking electric vehicles. So we've made it to the point where we've brought electric vehicles into our fleets. How do we understand things that we typically could through telematics on a fuel vehicle, like how much fuel is left? So we have something called a charge control, which essentially maps out where our vehicles are, the last state of charge, what their state of charge is now, if there's any associated issues, how much charging is complete based on what's on the network, et cetera. So it kind of gives you this overview of the state of all of your vehicles. Again, this is a new thing, and we're adopting something that we're not used to, so making sure that there's no vehicles dead on the road, that weren't charged appropriately and things like that. So it kind of gives an admin that overview on how to take control. We also use this report to help determine maybe where charge stations should be. So based on vehicle usage and where vehicles have spent the most time, plop a charging station right in there when there's a lot of activity in a particular area. So it's just kind of another way to use the tool to help make better decisions about where infrastructure should be, how heavily populated, how much energy, et cetera. And then final thing here would just be kind of on a vehicle-to-vehicle level. It just looks a little bit different, but understanding the exact state of charge per vehicle. We saw it in overview in the charge control, but just so you can see kind of telematics overall. So we'll still be tracking location, diagnostics, things like that, but understanding kind of a state of charge. This helps you to understand how long maybe a vehicle was plugged in and how long it took to get to that 100%. You can start to make assumptions about the bandwidth at certain times. Should we be scheduling certain hours that vehicles go so we don't hit the infrastructure too hard and we can kind of get the best out of it. But this kind of wraps in single vehicle reporting and single vehicle view to just kind of get a better understanding of how to control. So I will wrap it up there.
Very good. Thanks so much. And finally, we will turn to our partners in New York City to learn how they have been electrifying their fleet and some of the successes they've seen. Keith, Kerman, take it away.
Okay, that went off.
It should refresh in a second.
It's
There we
back
go.
on. Okay. All right. Good to be with you all. My name is Keith Kerman, the Chief Fleet Officer for the City of New York and a Deputy Commissioner at DCAS, the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. On behalf of Mayor Eric Adams and our Commissioner Don Pinnock, thank you for having us up here in Albany. It's always great to be here. I want to thank Mohammed Nadeem of DCAS for joining me on this journey. I want to recognize my longtime colleague Jeanette Moy, the Commissioner of the Office of General Services, and Deputy Commissioner Emily Rubenstein for inviting me here as well. And so I was incredibly happy to hear that John Ells had been hired by the state to do a state clean fleet plan. There's something about flattery and imitation. I don't know where that comes from. But you may know John is somewhat educationally challenged, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. So what we've done in New York City is provide a kind of easy way to get that whole project done. It's called copy, cut, and paste. And so I'm going to discuss that a little bit with you here, but really we can do a tutorial on those three keys, and then you'll be all set. So the New York City fleet's the largest municipal fleet in the United States, probably in the world. It's a little less than 30,000 assets at 10,000 school buses, the largest school bus program pretty much anywhere, and a lot of other partner organizations. It's a big fleet. It's certainly not the largest fleet in the United States. We guess it's somewhere 10 to 12 in terms of largest fleets straight up. Certainly Amazon, UPS are bigger, but there aren't really too many. Our three most profile clients are certainly the New York City Police Department, the New York City Fire Department, and the New York City Department of Sanitation, of course, and then the City Hall and the Mayor's Office. We have 55 agency clients in total. And one thing I'll say right up front, as we talk about what we're doing in sustainability, the majority of our fleet is emergency services. So we are not just trying to create an electric fleet and a sustainable fleet, but we are doing so, and I know this is a challenge that many of you face, in almost completely an emergency services environment. A little bit about our math. This is a slide to say we're a pretty large operation. Constitutionally, we are still a town fleet. That's all we are. We're a municipality. But it's a pretty big town fleet. It's a $1.4 billion spend. We have 1,300 auto mechanics alone. We probably spend a little bit short of $100 million on auto parts a year. It's a large operation out there. For a fun fact, we're the third largest fuel site operator in New York State, and as I'll get into, the largest electric charging manager in New York State. So we just announced last week, and many of you were there, so thank you, at our annual fleet show in Flushing Meadow Park on Thursday, what we call the NYC Clean Fleet Plan. And we first published this in 2015 and during the Paris Climate Accords, and it's all online, and you can get that, and if we distribute our deck, you can see the links. But we at that time committed to 50% greenhouse gas reduction by 2025. So as part of the Paris Climate Accords, as part of these, big, large, we're going to do all this great stuff on the environment commitments. And we basically had a three-part strategy to do this. Replace fossil diesel fuel with biofuels, including renewable diesel and biodiesel. Implement hybrids and efficiencies, right? Efficiency always matters no matter what you're doing, no matter what your propulsion source is. And hybrids are still an important and good solution in certain areas. We have a lot of operational duty cycles. We have a lot of operations and businesses we're all involved with. Do not discount hybrids. If they make sense and they're better than gas, do it. And then electrify everything we can as soon as we can, recognizing that there are tremendous opportunities to do that. And as John kind of mentioned, the electric vehicle industry is still very new, and it's still in its early stages. It's inning 1, maybe inning 2, but it's still very early in the game. And there are areas we can't. And we always talk about the biggest for us, plowing snow. Our sanitation trucks plow snow. We probably could electrify the waste, the routed scheduled waste component. Probably could be electrified. We have electric garbage trucks. We've gone through the routed scheduled component, and that actually probably could be electrified, but how do you plow snow? We have 3,000 plow trucks, and there is not an electric option to plowing snow. Our green math and what we announced. Take 5,000 plus electric vehicles and 2,000 plus electric charging ports and 4,300 plus hybrid vehicles, 21,000 alternative fuel vehicles in total, probably the large salt fuel program in the country. 10 million gallons of renewable diesel, and soon will be 16. The entire diesel portfolio is being switched to renewable diesel. Get rid of over 2,000 vehicles through Mayor Adams' fleet reduction initiative. Get rid of, through efficiencies, enormous amount of 5+ million gallons of gas. Keep doing it for another 18 months, and you will meet 50 by 25. And so most of what I just described to you is already done. This isn't our plan now. It was our plan 9 years ago. It's now our reality, and we will meet 50 by 25. So if I have any other message, these kind of big environmental goals, these big transformation goals are achievable. We announced it was achievable. I'm going to go through quickly the elements, focusing on EV, but first, there's something called renewable diesel. You can replace out all your fossil diesel. In the state of California, more than half of all diesel fuel sold in the state of California, public and private, across the whole state, is now renewable diesel. And the expectation by 2030 is no fossil diesel will be sold in the state of California, the entire state, for anybody. They have something called a low carbon fuel standard, and you should really, if you don't familiar with that, take a look at that. Oregon, Washington State have it, New Mexico just passed it, New York's working on it, and we hope to see progress on that. I was up here with the League of Conservation Voters a few weeks ago talking more about the low carbon fuel standard, but what will the low carbon fuel standard do for us? It'll do for us what it did for California. It'll push electrification. California leads the country, if not the world, in electrification, and it'll push renewable fuels when you can't electrify yet. They lead the nation by a mile in renewable fuels. So low carbon fuel standard could be very, very important. But what's interesting is we are the final days, couple more weeks, we will have replaced all fossil diesel fuel in the fleet. The Department of Sanitation plowed and took care of an entire winter, this winter, 100% using a non-fossil fuel, renewable diesel. There are lots of discussion about renewable diesel. I'm not here to get too into it, but I'll just give you a fun one. It doesn't smell. We were out at the New York Auto Show, and a bunch of sanitation guys kind of came walking over to me in a group. Normally when that happens, I start to sweat a little bit and look for an exit. But in this case, they were actually there to thank me and to say, we got to say, it's really remarkable. This renewable diesel thing has solved the day-to-day issue of our lives. The garages don't smell anymore. You can't smell them. All the diesel fuel and exhaust that have been part of our lives for our whole careers, it's kind of gone. You don't smell anything. So take a look at that. Really interesting. Efficiency matters. Mayor Adams led the administration calling for us to reduce the city fleet. The most fuel efficient and the safest vehicle is one you do not operate. And so we looked through telematics, not Samsara, but maybe sometime. We do track over 29,000 vehicles live in telematics, so we're a big supporter of the telematics implementation. We looked for efficiencies in the fleet, and we've reduced about 4% of the city fleet through doing that, actually a little bit north of 2,000 vehicles. We also made a commitment that any vehicle that we have to increase, because operations are complicated, we have organics happening for sanitation in New York, you're sometimes going to have to increase components of the fleet, but we will do that through all electric vehicles. Either the fleet increase will just be all electric, or the agency will have to compensate. If you don't have an electric truck that you need yet, you'll have to find in your increase X number of other vehicles to replace to electric. That's kind of just a little representation of our tracking, but I often joke that you can't walk 2 blocks in New York City and not encounter a city fleet vehicle. I now can show that analytically. So, a fun map. Efficiency has been very important. I'm not going to go through all of that because I do want to focus on electrification. But reducing fuel, reducing fleet, increasing fuel economy on new vehicles, which we have to report by law, increasing the amount of electric that we're using, which is going up. It's kind of like the chips. We are literally doubling the amount of electric we use to power the fleet almost every year now. It's really remarkable. And reducing maintenance costs. One thing we found that electric vehicles, and we've operated them over 10 years, so we have kind of a life look now inside our fleet, are tremendous on regular maintenance and repair costs. Now, you may be reading with some luxury cars in the rental space, there's this issue about crashes. That can be a real issue. I don't discount that. If you've got a luxury car with all kinds of telematics and all kinds of telemetry and all kinds of sophisticated sensors on it, and you're crashing them, that actually will be expensive. One of the reasons that we view emissions reduction and crash reduction, green and safe, as all being part of our sustainability program. All right, so on October 23rd, 2023, Mayor Adams signed what is now Local Law 140, calling us to fully electrify the fleet for light and medium duty units by 2035, and for everything, if possible, by 2038. And that includes everything. We give no exemptions. Everything's part of it, although there are exemptions if you can't meet it. But right up front, the ambition is emergency, non-emergency, trucks, and regular vehicles. And to give you a comparison, state of California, and we're often comparing ourselves to California or modeling our legislation in California, exempts all of those vehicles from the big law about selling EV only. All of emergency services is exempted. We're not saying that. We will electrify emergency services. I'm going to show you we have in some cases, as long as we can, as long as the models are there, the charging is there, the backup power is there. This is a little bit of the detail of what Local Law 140 does. I'll send out the slides, and you can obviously just Google the law. But I wanted to mention one interesting thing that we've done that I don't believe anyone else in the United States has done. There's a very reasonable concern. Like I mentioned, I supervise 1,300 mechanics. In the automotive industry, auto workers, mechanics, about what electrification means for them. And many of them have read about companies that electrify their fleets but then have kind of a closed shop. Only we fix them. You can only go to our dealers. Nobody gets the diagnostics. Nobody gets the equipment. Nobody learns how to fix them. We put a right to repair in our legislation. You cannot sell us an electric vehicle effective today, any size, unless you are also supplying us. You can charge us, it's America, but you have to supply us in a reasonable manner the diagnostics, the training, the shop equipment, the tools, so that we can repair those vehicles. And we think that's a very, very important step to take to bring everybody forward together in this initiative. We operate a very, very large charging network, as was mentioned here. Majority of ours are level 2 overnight chargers. And if your duty cycle is a one-shift vehicle, level 2 is great. It's inexpensive, it's easy to put in, it's non-peak load, it's not going to drain the grid. Go for it. And that's still the majority of our chargers. We now have 2,000 chargers, 1,700 of them are versions of level 2, and we're not ashamed of it. We do now have fast chargers, actually. That picture is our new public fast charging station at Flushing Meadow Corona Park outside the World's Fair Marina. If any of you go over there, feel free to fast charge. It's actually overly crowded. So proof that there is demand and interest in electric vehicles, we put out 5 new fast chargers. In fact, John worked in the very first one of these, and the lines are crazy. It's actually problematic. There are just people waiting in line, and now the fleet vehicles actually can't use them because there are 3 taxis or rideshare vehicles waiting for each one of them at all times. Proof that there's demand, also proof that we have a lot more to do to increase demand. That's our increase in network charging. One thing that goes to what John talked about in the ratios, not all of our charging is networked. And by the way, we operate about 700 of those 5,000 electric vehicles are off-road. Forklifts, GEM electric carts, solar light towers, those don't use charging. So, we do have a lot of fleet units that are actually just plugging in at your normal outlet. So, that is part of your electric use, but it's not part of our network charging. So I actually think 2 to 1 is probably right. We are looking for other types of solutions, especially when we get into resiliency. So battery storage and resiliency, backup power issues are huge issues. What happens when your all-electric emergency fleet encounters a power loss, right? You have a nor'easter and you figured out how to get all your sanitation trucks to plow as electric, and the lights go off from the first hour, right? So sanitation would be on the clock. Con Ed can't restore the power unless they can get around the streets, which means they have to be plowed, and sanitation can't plow them because they need power. Those are real involved issues. So we're looking at battery storage kind of issues. And here's a cautionary. For those who know the industry know that while I didn't take the picture off this slide, one of the companies on this slide is having some real serious public problems. And so, it is still a very new industry. We wish them well. But, those are things you take on as challenges, right? You're in a new industry. You have a lot of developments happening. There's a lot going on in the marketplace. And so we invested in these battery storage units. And we were kind of as interested as anyone just last week when some pretty concerning press and emails came out from the company. So it's one of the challenges you have to work on. Training, it's been mentioned, extraordinarily important. We put out a training deck for all city employees called Let's Talk About EV, which is really fun. It's all public record. You can download it. That slide you can see is actually us explaining why charging from 20% to 80% is pretty quick, and 80% to 100% takes an enormous amount of time. And we use the analogy of a movie theater. If you're going into a movie theater and it's a good movie, which there are fewer of those these days, you can fill up about 80% of the movie theater pretty quickly. Everybody just finds a seat. But that last 20%, it's all, excuse me, can you get up? Hey, sorry, I got to go over there. It's very slow. Electric batteries work the same way, so check that out. Fire safety, extraordinarily important issue. I'm sure if you're following New York City, we're having a lot of issues with e-bikes and fires. A lot of people have lost their lives. In many ways, it's e-bikes and improperly designed substandard e-bikes are threatening to reverse decades of fire safety progress in the city. They also are a threat to electrification in general. If batteries become associated with deadly fires, it's only going to be so long before that goes beyond e-bikes and people get concerned about your vehicles and your charging stations. The distinction between UL and non-UL fades. So it's extraordinarily important in New York City. Laura Kavanaugh, the fire commissioner, is leading not just in New York City but nationally on this issue. But extraordinarily important that we get all aspects of transport electrification right, because it will all, in the public mind, be one thing. Couple last things I want to mention. One, as you roll out all this infrastructure, please remember to maintain it. So it's great to have your first charger and your 10th charger and your 100th charger. We now have our 2000th charger, and we have a 4-person full-time unit we had to scale up and get funded to go out there and fix this stuff, because any infrastructure, it breaks down. There are a lot of service issues. Some of them are complicated. Some of them mix between mechanics and electricians. And the last thing I just want to say is we're making progress. So just in the New York Auto Show last week, some of the new types of vehicles we never thought would be electrified, correction buses, right? So if you come down the city and you get arrested and you get detained, at least you can feel good about how you transport. Electric sweepers. Van Halen, this is actually the Taxi and Limousine Commission's new community outreach van, and it's all electric. Next to that is their new enforcement vehicle. And as you probably know, we have 150 Mach-E's at the police department, but we're starting to take all our enforcement divisions at sanitation, parks, DEP, that's the taxi new, and electrify. On the right is our first canine emergency response unit. A Ford Lightning, like one that is out here today in display, is now going to be used as a canine emergency response unit, and safer for the employees, and by the way, safer for the animals. And we kind of have learned that. So with that, I just want to thank you again. Happy to be with all of you. I know many of you, but not all of you. Please come say hello, and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, all. So we do have some time for audience questions, if you want to come to the center mic. Don't have to.
I've done this long enough that if you do not ask questions of me, I will ask questions of you, and they'll be personal.
No? All right. Well, we've had a couple of great sessions. So again, appreciate the panelists here today, talking through and sharing their insights from their experiences, other jurisdictions, other kinds of fleets. So again, thanks. And we will take a quick break. We will come back at noon, and we will learn more about buying an EV.